This turns into something like a mailbag episode because I've been thinking about this mostly since talking about Deion Burks at Oklahoma and a lot of Jeremiah Smith, JJ, to those that know him at Ohio State. And I even wanted to talk a little bit about LSU and Kyren Lacy and Garrett Nussmeier and the changes that we're seeing in these programs that we all expect to be good. Now, we all expect Ohio State to be a contender for the Big Ten championship and later in the year for the national championship. Oklahoma and LSU, we still think are good, but also are probably going into the season looking to secure one of those at-large bids in the new 12-team playoff. And this season is going to be really interesting and important because it's going to level set what we're going to expect from programs as long as we're in the 12-team playoff. I think that we're locked into this until the end of the next ESPN deal. And then we might even see this go to 16 teams, and it might even become more like the NFL and how we emulate it. Like we call it at-large burst, they call it a wild card, right? We call it a national championship, they call it a world championship. We can keep going on about this, but I like where we're going with the sport. That said, the way that the sport is being played is always constantly evolving. And as I picked out these three programs, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and LSU, I picked out three programs that are undergoing tremendous change at the quarterback position and at the wide receiver position in as far as who you can expect to provide most of the production. At Ohio State, it was Kyle McCord and Marvin Harrison Jr., right? We think that Marvin Harrison Jr. was a little bit more important than Kyle McCord. However, behind Marvin Harrison Jr., you have to get to Cade Stover and then Emeka Egbuka before you get to the next best receivers out there. And neither one of those guys had more than 600 yards receiving. Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. was good enough to win the Biletnikoff Award without even playing in the college football playoff or the Big Ten championship. That's how good he was. At Oklahoma, it's been a couple of years since we had a 1,000-yard receiver. And just because you have a 1,000-yard receiver does not mean that you're going to have a good football team. However, it is an arbitrary number that we have picked out for rushers and for receivers for what we think is pretty doggone good in as far as what your program or what your player is capable of. I would look again at Marvin Harrison Jr., who went over, basically did what he did sophomore as a junior, and it was people paying attention this time. But going over 1,000 yards is still a very big deal in all sports, even as we're playing more games, right? It doesn't mean you're averaging 100 yards receiving a game or 100 yards rushing a game. It does mean that you've been dependable enough that they want to give you the football, and defenses aren't at all sure about what they can do to stop you. Looking at a place like Oklahoma, where you have Jackson Arnold coming into a spot that was once occupied by Dillon Gabriel, and then you have Deion Burks, who we think is going to ascend to the top of the depth chart, who is a physical freak, but also going to be joined over there with Nick Anderson, Jaleel Farouk. We keep going down the line on this because Andrew Anthony, because there's depth at Oklahoma, and I think that was the part that I didn't say enough of. I think Jackson Arnold's going to have a whole lot to do with whether or not Oklahoma's good in 2024, but that depth at wide receiver and at tailback, quite honestly, you know, what we got out of Tawee Walker, we won't be getting out of him this year for obvious reasons, is important. And then at LSU, it wasn't just that Jaden Daniels turned into a superhero in 2023. It was that he had superheroes at wide receiver, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. And this year, it will be Garrett Nussmeier throwing passes to Kyren Lacy, who, like Cade Stover and Emeka Egbuka, and like most of Oklahoma the last couple of years, has not gone over 1,000 yards receiving. So the way I tend to look at this is you guys have really smart things to say oftentimes in the comments when they're not ad hominem attacks at me, basically for looking good in a turtleneck or having a widow's peak or just being out here being myself, okay? I'm this way full time with everybody I meet, and that means you too. However, I do acknowledge that there are some times for which we need to really go back to another segment and do it again because it's going to be a storyline that we continue to follow. And I got this one from Jackie Hallmark. I'm sure that's a username, but it's a username that Jackie Hallmark. But I'm going to let that one slide. You come at me with something stupid or like a ridiculous profile picture, I'm going to treat you the way that you present yourself. I'm presenting myself to you like this with a level of decorum, right? We'll do that. So the comment was pretty insightful in as far as what this person would want. It is, I would rather have a 3 or 4 receiver rotation with 600 yards apiece than have to depend on one to get 1,000. Gives the opponent's defense more to worry about. And I have an answer for this, but I want to get at this by offering all of you the same sort of alternative. So let's go through 5, right? I think 5 is a good number. Let's say you have in your program a rusher that doesn't go for 500 yards and a receiver that doesn't go for 500 yards. Probably don't like that at all, no matter how that looks on paper, because Iowa basically do something similar. And you wouldn't want to be the person that is an Iowa Hawkeye fan just watching the offense not embarrass you. 2 players going for 600 or more. Okay, yeah, that's probably something you can expect, but it's not going to light you up. Oklahoma didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher in 2023, but won 10 games. Had a 1,300-yard rusher in 2022, and we finished 6-7, right? Would you like just one 1,500-yard receiver, and then you'll take what you can get? I think there's something to that, and I'll unpack that in a bit. A 1,000-yard rusher and a receiver? Yeah, I think everybody would like a 1,000-yard rusher and a 1,000-yard receiver. The inverse of that is maybe you are playing football for Lincoln Riley or root for a Lincoln Riley football team because he had 2 1,000-yard rushers and a 1,000-yard receiver at Oklahoma. And he had a Heisman Trophy finalist at quarterback at Oklahoma. And then you go and play LSU in the Peach Bowl, and we all know how that went. So that's not necessarily indicative of a good football team to have a 1,000-yard rusher and a 1,000-yard receiver. Is indicative of a good offense, but is it coming at the expense of a good defense? And one of the things that Oklahoma, Ohio State, and LSU fans will all tell you, we can't stand a bad defense. Matt House is a profane gesture, met with a profane gesture in LSU. The same thing I think is true of Alex Grinch at Ohio State or even at Oklahoma, right? You'll put up with a lot. You will not put up with a bad defense. You need to be good on defense if you want fans to be on your side, right? And to think that your football team is worth a damn. Because we aspire to be tough, we aspire to be fast, and we aspire to win. But among other things, the thing you cannot be for football is considered weak or soft. We will not allow it. It is a sport that was created to simulate trench warfare by Walter Camp. He railed against the forward pass because he wanted to see guys learning how to fight. That's the point. The sport is built on toughness, on grit, on desire, on ain't no blood, no foul, right? And even when there was blood, probably didn't want you to call a foul. The last one there is a 2,000-yard rusher. And I bring that one up because we will see another 2,000-yard rusher, right? It has not become so uncommon like some others. We saw Ollie Gordon go for 1,700 on the ground and then 2,000 from scrimmage. Chuba Hubbard went for 2,000 yards rushing at Oklahoma State, right? We've seen great players like Jonathan Taylor comes to mind who can get close. Wisconsin used to feel like they were going to have one every couple of years, really. But is that indicative of a good football team? It's indicative of a team that probably plays great defense because you have great ball control and you're able to hold the ball long enough. You're not putting your defense out there in situations that are hard to defend. Reminds me a lot of, frankly, how Michigan built their football team. They didn't have any 2,000-yard rushers, but they were building around, we're going to run the ball and run the ball and run the ball, and we're going to give our defense an opportunity to attack the offense with a field advantage. I think I would rather have the 1,500-yard receiver, and then we'll take what we can get for a couple of reasons. I'd rather have one guy you absolutely cannot stop than a variety pack of guys that maybe kind of, sort of, you feel good about. Because if you have one person that the defense cannot stop, the rule is you feed that person the football until they can no longer stand up. You give that person the football because football comes down to putting your players in the best position to win matchups. You need your Jimmy to be better than their Joe. And once you identify that, it would be malpractice for you to go away from it. If you know that you can run the ball for 5 yards a clip every time a tailback touches the ball, you're going to protect them from getting tired. You're going to find ways to try to spread the ball out. But the ball is going to go back to that person more often than it's going to go to anybody else. You're going to continue to build your program so that you got options, right? So let's say that that player that you think is your home run hitter ain't hitting home runs late in the season. You need to have options, and that's why we talk about depth, right? I'll give you another example. Last year, Travion Henderson was the reason that Ohio State was able to come back and beat Notre Dame, okay? Travion Henderson rushed for 926 yards in 2023. He might not be RB1 in 2024, even though he was the leading rusher on that football team by some margin. Now, they added Quinshon Judkins, but my point is the same here. You want to have somebody ready to go if Travion ain't the Travion you saw in September in November. That's why we try to get guys touches and we try to get guys game action because, yeah, the human element is important here, and I don't want to act as if it is not. But I want to know I have a guy that come hell or high water, got to have in moments, we're going to him. That is the reason I don't like having 3 or 4 because I don't think the defense needs to worry about 3 or 4 if you're really good. I think they'll have to worry about 1 or 2. Which is why it's an embarrassment of riches at Ohio State with this receiving core because you got 6 guys that could be ones anywhere they want to be. And you have similar all over the country. So as we continue to talk through this, I wanted to give that a little bit of air, especially as we're going to play more football games and the games are becoming more meaningful with the 12-team playoff.